In the shadowed heart of the 14th century, a silent predator crossed the thresholds of empires and whispered its way into the veins of Europe. No trumpets announced its arrival, no banners flew in warning. It came aboard the ships of Genoese merchants, fleeing the Crimean battlefields, slipping past the bustling ports of the Mediterranean like a ghost in the salt air. By the time the first victims clutched their swollen necks in the narrow streets of Messina in Sicily, the old world was already dying. This was the shock of entering a new age, a rupture so profound that the very rhythm of human existence fractured, leaving survivors to stumble forward into a landscape forever altered. The Black Death did not merely kill millions, it dismantled the medieval order, exposing the fragility of faith, hierarchy, and certainty that had defined centuries of European life. Europe in the early 1340s breathed with the steady pulse of a deeply rooted medieval world. Great cathedrals pierced the skies above cities like Paris, Florence, and London, their stained glass catching the weak northern sun and casting jeweled light onto stone floors worn smooth by generations of pilgrims. Peasants toiled in open fields under the three-field system, their days marked by the tolling of church bells and the turning of seasons. In the manors, lords oversaw vassals bound by oaths of fealty, while merchants in the growing towns traded wool, spices, and cloth along routes that stretched from the Baltic to the Levant. Life was hard, often brutal, yet it felt eternal. Families crowded into timber-framed houses, sharing meals of coarse bread, ale, and salted meat. Children played in muddy lanes, and the elderly passed down stories of saints and kings. The air carried the scent of wood smoke, damp earth, and incense from Sunday masses. Few could imagine that this intricate web of obligation and routine was about to unravel with terrifying speed. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly stable order, invisible warning signs flickered, like distant lightning. In the east, travelers spoke in hushed tones of a great pestilence that had ravaged the Mongol Khanates and the crowded cities of China and India. Strange tales reached European courts of entire regions emptied, of bodies piled in streets, of a sickness that turned victims black with putrid swellings. Merchants and missionaries carried these stories along the Silk Road, but they were dismissed as exaggerations from distant barbarous lands. In Europe itself, the population had swelled after centuries of relative peace and agricultural improvement, pressing against limited resources. Harvests occasionally failed, causing localized famines that weakened bodies and spirits. Wars between England and France simmered, draining treasuries and scattering soldiers who moved like vectors across the continent. Still, the Church preached divine order, and scholars studied ancient texts, confident that God's plan remained immutable. No one understood what was coming next. The tension rose quietly at first, almost imperceptibly. In the autumn of 1347, 12 Genoese galleys docked in Messina after a harrowing voyage from the Black Sea. Crew members lay dying, their bodies marked by mysterious black boils and fevered delirium. Local authorities, alarmed but uncertain, ordered the ships away, yet the damage was done. Rats scurried ashore carrying fleas heavy with the bacterium Yersinia pestis. Within days, the first deaths multiplied. Panic spread through whispered conversations in taverns and markets. Physicians in long robes examined patients, offering bloodletting and herbal concoctions, while priests administered last rites amid the growing stench of decay. Families burned fires in their homes, hoping the smoke would purify the air. But the plague moved relentlessly, traveling along trade routes, leaping from town to town, from household to household. By the spring of 1348, it had reached the Italian mainland, then France, and soon the British Isles. The invisible enemy thrived in the close quarters of medieval life, turning the familiar comforts of community into vectors of death. Key decisions, born of fear and ignorance, accelerated the catastrophe. Rulers issued decrees banning travel and closing markets, but enforcement was patchy and often too late. Some cities attempted rudimentary quarantines, isolating ships for 40 days, yet the disease had already infiltrated the water supplies and the very breath of the people. The Church, facing its greatest test, organized processions of flagellants who whipped themselves in public squares, believing sin had invited divine wrath. Jews were scapegoated in many regions, accused of poisoning wells, leading to horrific pogroms that only added to the chaos. Meanwhile, the wealthy fled to isolated country estates, abandoning their servants and tenants. These choices, made under extreme pressure, revealed the fractures in medieval society. Loyalty dissolved when survival was at stake. The countryside, once a source of sustenance, became a place of flight and abandonment, as laborers perished in the fields, their tools left rusting beside unharvested crops. The moment the system began to fail arrived not with a single cataclysm, but with a cascading series of breakdowns that echoed through every layer of existence. Entire villages fell silent, their streets overgrown with weeds, as bodies lay unburied. In the cities, the dead outnumbered the living who could perform the rites of burial. Mass graves were dug in churchyards, then hastily expanded into plague pits, where corpses were layered like cordwood. The air thickened with the acrid smoke of funeral pyres and the metallic tang of blood from opened buboes. Priests died alongside their flocks, leaving the dying without absolution. Markets emptied, trade collapsed, and money itself lost meaning as inflation soared from labor shortages. Fear gripped the survivors, neighbors avoided neighbors, parents abandoned children, and the routines that have defined human dignity crumbled into primal terror. The grand institutions, the church, the feudal system, the guilds, stood exposed, as powerless against this invisible force. The collapse did not begin with chaos, it began quietly in the bodies of the first victims, and spread until the old world could no longer sustain itself. The human consequences were devastating and intimate. Families watched helplessly as loved ones suffered agonizing deaths, their lymph nodes swelling into grotesque buboes that burst with foul pus. Children orphaned in the streets begged for food that no longer existed. Social bonds snapped under the weight of mortality. Inheritance laws broke down as properties passed to distant or unexpected heirs. In the aftermath of the first wave, which killed perhaps 30 to 60% of Europe's population, a strange psychological shift occurred. Some survivors embraced hedonism, indulging in excess as if tomorrow might never come, while others turned to fervent piety or mysticism. The labor force vanished, empowering the surviving peasants to demand higher wages and better conditions. Lords, desperate for workers, sometimes found themselves negotiating with those they once commanded. The silence in once bustling towns was haunting, broken only by the occasional wail of grief or the creak of empty carts. The plague returned in waves over the following decades, ensuring that the trauma remained etched into the collective memory. In the long term, this rupture reshaped the course of Western civilization in ways that few at the time could have foreseen. The drastic reduction in population led to a surplus of land and resources, weakening the rigid manorial system and accelerating the rise of a money-based economy. Art and literature began to reflect a new realism, confronting mortality with unflinching honesty, as seen in the works of Boccaccio and the emerging humanist thinkers. The Church, having lost so many clergy, faced criticism and reformist stirrings that would later fuel the Protestant Reformation. Technological and agricultural innovations gained momentum to compensate for lost manpower. Europe, bloodied and diminished, turned outward, with the shock of the plague contributing to a restless spirit that would eventually drive exploration and the Renaissance. The old certainties of divine hierarchy gave way to a more questioning, individualistic worldview. What had seemed like the end of the world became paradoxically the painful birth of a new age. Yet even as Europe slowly rebuilt, the echoes of that profound shock lingered like ghosts in the stones of abandoned villages and the altered rhythms of daily life. The survivors carried invisible scars, a heightened awareness of life's fragility that influenced everything from architecture to philosophy. The transition was never clean or triumphant. It was marked by recurring outbreaks, economic turmoil, and cultural upheaval. The medieval world had not simply faded, it had been violently severed, forcing humanity to confront the limits of its institutions and beliefs. In the quiet moments between crises, people began to imagine different futures, ones not bound by the same feudal chains or unquestioned doctrines. The shock of entering this new age was not just about survival. It was about redefining what it meant to be human in a world that could no longer promise continuity. Centuries later, standing amid the ruins of what was once a thriving medieval hamlet, One can almost hear the faint remnants of that distant terror, the creak of wooden beams settling into decay, the wind whispering through empty doorways. The Black Death remains a mirror for our own times, a reminder that civilizations, no matter how grand or seemingly eternal, rest upon foundations that can crumble when confronted by forces beyond their control. The survivors did not emerge unchanged. They stepped into an uncertain dawn, carrying both profound loss and the seeds of reinvention. In their struggle, we glimpse the universal truth of historical rupture, that every ending contains the potential for transformation, however painful the passage may be. The new age arrived not with celebration, but with the heavy silence of graves and the tentative footsteps of those left to rebuild.